Welcome to the Historic Racing News Podcast.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. Our traditional opening words on this Historic Racing News Podcast, but for once not the familiar voice of our own Paul Tarsey, as for this month only, I am hosting, and I am Paul Jurd, who along with Paul and Jim Roller are our regular core team. Both Paul and Jim have been pretty unwell of late. Paul hit for 6 by a combination of issues, but now on the mend. While I'm not sure hit for 6 is a phrase I can use for North Carolina-based Jim, but I'm also not sure the baseball equivalent home run has quite the same second meaning. And in fact, I now believe that Grand Slam is the phrase, but I'm sure you get the idea. Now, both gents have been ordered to take things easy, and with not only the doctor's advice to bear in mind, but also the wrath of their good ladies Lisa and Betty to deal with if they overstep the mark, I've stepped in to top and tail this month's pod. Now, being our usual selves, we only realised at the last minute that this is actually our 100th podcast. So I think we'll be celebrating that milestone in much better style in subsequent editions. We put together a couple of 1-hour specials for Radio Le Mans that were used over Le Mans week, featuring Le Mans memories from the team and a host of other motorsport names, and got such great feedback that we wanted to give all of you the opportunity to hear them. So we're devoting this edition of the Historic Racing News Podcast to bringing you those stories and memories in full. We hope you enjoy it, and also hope that you join me in wishing Paul and Jim a rapid return to rude health in time for our next podcast.
Historic Racing News presents Le Mans Memories. Some funny.
They showed us to these toilets. I've never been in a most magnificent toilet in all my life. It was absolutely fantastic. Even the toilet seat was covered in sort of blue velour.
I'd been there in the old days with the old pit lane and everything of having to purchase toilet paper from the little French ladies that sat in front of the restroom if you needed toilet paper, which led to the standard line here is if you're going to Le Mans, bring your own toilet paper, okay?
And I lasted about 2 laps and I was just absolutely busting. And he said, no way, you have to stay out. Just pee in your pants. And I thought, well, yeah, I can pee in my pants because lots of drivers do it, but I'm going to leave a puddle for a living legend, Derek Bell, who was in next.
And some mostly true.
It was basically the Kramer team and the whole sandwich story, which of course I converted to a baguette because a baguette is what they have are sandwiches.
So now see the truth comes out.
And now, here's your host, Paul Tarsey.
Greetings, 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 and welcome to this special show, which we have called Le Mans Memories from Historic Racing News. And we will talk to all sorts of people from both sides of the spectator fences. My name is Paul Tarsey, and I'm joined by Jim Roller and Paul Jurd, who've both visited the race many times.
On our first show, Derek Warwick will talk to Paul about his 5 participations in Le Mans, which culminated in drives in the Silhouette Jaguars and his victory at the wheel of the Peugeot 905 in 1992. We'll hear from Kevin Jeannette about, well, let's call it creative thinking, which enabled the Whittington brothers, together with Klaus Ulrich, to cross the start-finish line as victors in 1979.
And Mark Raffauf, who steered IMSA through some of its most exciting times, shares some of his experiences. And we also have Les Thacker, BP Motorsport Supremo for many years, explaining just how he got himself arrested coming out of a very plush WC in the Le Mans paddock.
We'll also look back nearly half a century to a time when the whole place was very much less sophisticated than it is now, particularly for the humble spectator. Jim, there are so many stories, and we only have time for a handful in these 2 shows, but everyone has a Le Mans story.
We certainly do, Paul. Each one of the 3 of us, and I'm sure all of our listeners do as well. Le Mans is like Phantom of the Opera or Lovers, they say. You never forget your first. Mine was 1988, producing coverage for ESPN. This, of course, was pre-chicanes and, well, frankly, pre-clean bathrooms. But my fondest memories are from my times at Radio Le Mans in 2000, when I and Chuck Dressing became the first American voices on the great service. The 2000 race had finished, and my late wife Ann and I were in the pits, and a fan had heard us talking and came up and asked, "Are you Chuck?" To which Ann replied, "No, this is Jim." And the fan's face lit up, and he explained, "You're the other one." Then, after more than a decade of working for Radio Le Mans in 2014, the fans paid me the highest honor I've ever received, when after the passing of Ann in April, they awarded me the Spirit of the Race Award for working the event just 2 months after her passing. I was beyond touched, and must say the great event and the fans are one of the big reasons that I was able to carry on. Thanks again to the Radio Le Mans audience for that. And of course, it brought the three of us together. Paul Tarsey began a wonderful friendship for you and I. But that first trip will never be forgotten. It was certainly a different place in 1988 than it is today.
It's amazing who you can get to meet in our virtual pub, the Cat and Keyboard. And I'm here with someone I've known for all of his life and most of mine. That's my baby brother, Mark Tarsey. Now, Mark has shared my passion for Le Mans for many years, and I thought that this was a good opportunity for him to share some of his thoughts about those early days at Le Mans, and that you and I actually got the Le Mans bug one way and another before we ever went to Le Mans through the family.
Oh, yes, it was, because our dad was a long-time visitor, going back, I think, to 1956 originally, and attended probably 8 or 9, I think, consecutive Le Mans. So when I think back to that, that's only like 14 years or so before we started going. So the bug was already planted, at least.
And now, if I'm correct, and I don't want to make you feel bad about this, but if I'm correct, your first trip to Le Mans was, wait for it, 46 years ago. And that it was just such a different place, different world than it is now. And how much advanced planning went into that first trip?
I think you can say that as much as you could, which frankly wasn't very much. Not like today, where you had a few clicks of a mouse and you'd booked the whole thing. Back then, all you could really do was book your travel. So that was a ferry there and a ferry back, and buy a couple of things in advance, such as a map, and making sure, of course, that you had your deflectors on your headlights installed, because you didn't want to get pulled over by the gendarme for not doing that. So apart from that, we had no idea what the catering was going to be like, access to shopping, nothing at all. So we did bring one or two things with us that we thought would be unlikely that be available down there. And I do recall one piece of preparation, which was we actually cooked a curry back at home. And when I think back to that, all the bacteria that must have been in that from cooling down over a period of hours and probably days by the time we actually came to eat it. But we're all still alive. And so the short answer is as much preparation as we could do, but it wasn't very much.
And I think that's very much the case, that we arrived at Le Mans town, and as most of our listeners will know, you approach Le Mans city before you ever get to the racetrack, which is south of the city. And so we found ourselves driving around the peripherique of Le Mans city, not having the foggiest idea where we were going.
I think you have to go back a little bit further than that. When we arrived in Calais at about 2 a.m, we were thinking, well, it's about 225 miles or something. And bear in mind, in those days, no autoroute. Yeah, so this was down Route Nationale. It was, through the towns of Abbeville and Rouen, Alençon, all on single-track roads, or rather ordinary roads. and consequently not very fast. Some of the roads that went through the towns, because none of them were bypassed, that went through the towns were cobbled streets with road signs that were difficult to comprehend. And I was thinking back when we were preparing this conversation, I was thinking back to what Ian Rush, the Liverpool footballer, said, that when he went to play for Juventus in Turin, it was like being in a foreign country. and you know, this was like being in a foreign country because it very definitely was. It was so alien to everything that we knew, besides, of course, driving on a different side of the street and everything else. So we were thinking, we arrive at 2 a.m, we should be through Rouen before rush hour, and indeed we had a little stop along the way. But what I still can't work out to this day is we arrived around 2 or so in the morning, but we didn't get to Le Mans until about 9 p.m. So how on earth did it take us 18 hours or so to get from Calais to Le Mans? I still don't know the answer to that question, even with a couple of stops. But we did eventually get there, and you know, the map did show where the circuit was, but only because you could make out where the towns or the villages of Mulsanne and Arnage were. But apart from that, we knew nothing. And as you say, when we arrived down near to the circuit, we were really, it was mayhem, because the place was very busy. We arrived on Thursday evening, so second practice night, and so the place was really busy and very noisy, of course. And eventually we just lent on the one piece of advice that we got from our dad, which was the best place to head for is parking vert, or garage vert. So we did, and eventually we found garage vert, and I think through trial and error, and kept going towards the noise. That was our guiding thing, and we eventually found ourselves in parking vert, or garage vert, and drove into this area, paid all our money, which seemed to be most of what we had to spend, for our budget for the week, in my Fiat 131 Mirafiori estate, and they thought, well, at least we've arrived, and our priority was to find somewhere to pitch a tent.
And that was the next challenge. But I think it's fair to say that France was a lot more French then than it is now. That it's a dreadful thing to say that English was not widely spoken, and it is now, but it's true, and that our French was schoolboy French at the very best, and that we had no idea where we were going. We followed those garage vert signs, and eventually we pitched up at a campsite, and it was luck, but we probably got the best one.
Oh yes, I mean, extreme luck. We drove into this campsite having given all this money away, and we thought, well, should we have asked them where our pitch is? No, we'll just press on. Anyway, we did, and we soon realised that there were no pitches. It was a bun fight. In the people just parked and found us somewhere to park up either a motorhome or a car or whatever it was, and so we did, and found ourselves quite close to some noise, and we thought, well, what shall we do? And the light was fading quickly. It was probably, 10:30 by this point, and so we thought, well, we'll just get our bearings and see where we were. So we dropped the car, walked, I would think, 60 or 70 yards to find a picket fence and the Dunlop Bridge, because in those days all there was a picket fence and then a little hump, and then the track. So we were probably 60 or 70 yards from the track, so in that respect we really landed on our feet and managed to put the tent up in some way or somehow, just about in a bit of light, to allow ourselves to get some sleep that night.
But if you look at the aerial pictures now, that we were actually pitching our tent in what is now the gravel trap for the Dunlop chicane, because it was before the Dunlop chicane, and that the cars were coming past the pits and then a long right-hander and under the Dunlop bridge and then down to the S's. So therefore the organisers claimed a big chunk of that campsite as being the gravel trap. But that's where we were.
I often wonder, if they put a time capsule underneath where we were, or indeed just did an excavation, what on earth they would have found when they were building the gravel trap, because I know that we left some things in there which we hadn't meant to leave, and certainly it leads on to a chat about the sanitation. I'm sure that if they had planted a few trees where the gravel trap is now, they'd have grown like crazy. Because there was so much methane underneath the surface there, but that's exactly where it was, yeah.
And that we'll talk about the sanitation, and we'll talk about the washing facilities in part 2. So join us for part 2 of these Le Mans memories, and with my brother, my baby brother, Mark Tarsey.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast.
Now, one of the people you'll be hearing from a couple of times during our 2 episodes of the Le Mans Memory Specials is one Kevin Jeannette. He has many memories. He's made many trips to Le Mans, and he's a fantastic storyteller. And the first one he's going to share with us is about records at Le Mans. Some are more important than others.
Breaking historic record of any kind, whether you were the guy that stayed out the longest before the first pit stop, someone gets to have that record. I do have a record at the Indy 500 with Don Whittington. We still have the record for the most pit stops in a car that fit the Indy 500. I thought it was something like 26 pit stops because Don wanted us to fix the car, and he just kept coming in and coming in. We actually found out it was a broken stabilizer gizmo, and we pretty much fixed the car. But when it was all said and done, someone said, "You guys have a record." So even the silly records are worth it. But of course, at Le Mans, my son Gunnar Jeannette, who's the team principal for AO Racing today, and it's easy to know he's the guy that got the green dinosaur car and the pink one too with Roxy, and Spike, who will be at the 2025 Le Mans in P2 class with PJ. Yeah. But anyway, with Gunnar, we were there in 2000 under an assumed name because we bought an entry from Manthe Racing, who are still a big part of Porsche private, sport racing. But as it ended up, someone said, who is a teammate with Freisinger and a friend, the family owns some sort of a big watch company. I won't give him any free advertisement, but he was a real fan and a real racer. He said, if you guys finish, Gunnar will be the youngest finisher in the history of Le Mans. And we didn't know that. Maybe someone thought of it, but we had problems with the car. It was the new GT3R was just out, so it had some teething problems. And some of them were probably caused by us. But as it ended up, we lost a couple cylinders and had to turn fuel systems off to the cylinders so the motor didn't blow up. And we ended up finishing, which made us classified, therefore Gunnar beating Ricardo Rodriguez, not Pedro, but Ricardo had the record, and Gunnar beat a Rodriguez for a pretty historic thing at Le Mans. So we went back to the home ground saying that, our son, or Gunnar, said that he's now the youngest finisher in the history of Le Mans. And that lasted just less than 15 years when a kid from Arizona ended up getting it. And, people can Google that and see it. But so that was a pretty cool record until the next year we joined Freisinger, and they got a podium. They finished second in class. So 2 times at Le Mans for Gunnar, that's a pretty good show.
There are lots of ways to keep up with historic racing news. Our podcast comes out on the first Wednesday of every month. The 2-hour show includes interviews with drivers and other personalities from years gone by, plus news of historic events like the Goodwood Revival and the Silverstone Festival. And Jim Roller keeps us up to speed on happenings stateside and looks at the activities both on and off the track in the USA.
And you can also follow us on our YouTube channel, HRN Chronicles. It's our version of a time machine. We have archive features, exclusive interviews, and behind-the-scenes stories going way back into the history of our glorious sport. Plus, we keep an eye on the latest classic and competition car auction news. It's a place where motorsport's history lives.
And don't forget our amazing Facebook page. With over 1 million views a month, it is one of the leading social media channels for the historic racing fan. We feature tales from years gone by, news from around the racing world, and we also take the opportunity to flesh out the stories we cover on our podcasts with photographs and yet more background information.
If you would like to find more editions of the Historic Racing News podcast, try searching Historic Racing News wherever you get your podcasts.
The YouTube channel is simply called HRN Chronicles.
And just search Facebook for the Historic Racing News page.
Now back to the Historic Racing News podcast and Paul Tarsey.
Now, if you were running a racing team or wanting to run a racing team or anything like it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even, the man that you had to talk to was Les Thacker, because he was responsible for spending a lot of BP's money over the years in motorsport. But he's here with us now to talk about something a bit different, because Les, you're a great Le Mans fan. When did you first go to Le Mans?
I just left the army, Paul. I think it was 63. Oh, I left the army in 63, so it must have been either that June or it might have been the year later, 64. And of course, Le Mans in those days was it was a different culture, basically the same track as we got today, but the whole atmosphere was totally different. Today's Le Mans is much like Formula One, isn't it? Very, very professional. Nobody smiles, it's all very serious because of the just the enormous amount of resource which is put into Formula One or something like Le Mans. So it was much more carefree in those days. And the first time I went, I think I was very fortunate, being a friend of somebody who had a hospitality unit there over the pits. So I stayed up for the whole 24 hours. And can you believe that? But I did. I must have nodded off time and the odd occasion. But you were very young in those days, and it was just an all-round, absolutely A1 experience, of course, to be able to go behind the scenes, really, and then in a relative comfort, shall we say. So that was my first visit, and I went back a few times afterwards, but it did gradually change, as all things do, because cultures change, and you have to accept that it's not the way it used to be, put it that way.
No, and as they say, nostalgia isn't what it used to be. But I think one of the times that you were there, you were fresh out of the army in your army greatcoat, which served a purpose.
Well, I was with my oldest chum, Roger Hearn, who we were both in the army together, doing different jobs. And in those days, it was, I suppose, how shall we put this? The sort of the officer class was a bit different. It was all terribly Victorian, and you had to wear certain bits of kit and all the rest of it. And when you came out of the army, of course, some of the stuff you still had. One of the things we all wore, which was sort of standard uniform for officers, was a sort of riding mac, It had a sort of Burberry interior, and it was made of some sort of rubberized fabric. An awful bit of kit, because it sort of hung round your ankles, and you walked around like with this tent on you. But the great thing was it was in, and I think originally they were designed to go over the flanks of horses and things, you know. But so you can imagine they were very, very old style. But the great thing about them, and they were terribly, terribly waterproof. Nothing got through. And Le Mans, as you well know, Paul, you've been there enough times, sometimes has the odd downpour. And we got caught in this absolute monsoon, and we were both looking around for a toilet. And facilities in those days, in the 60s, there wasn't a huge amount of public conveniences around. And Roger saw this sort of enclosure with a couple of gendarmes standing at attention on it. And he said, oh, hang on, it looks like a toilet over there. So we went up to the entrance to this enclosure, and they gave us a salute. And we thought, oh, this is pretty good. And we sort of inquired about a toilet. And they said, oh, yes. And they showed us to these toilets. I've never been in a most magnificent toilet in all my life. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, even the toilet seat was covered in sort of blue velour. Fantastic. Anyway, we made ourselves, use the facilities. And on the way out, all of a sudden things changed, and we both got arrested because we found out that we'd used President Pompidou's toilet. So I don't know. I think it was the riding max that did the job. You know.
Yeah, it's got you in.
Yeah. So one of my funny experiences at Le Mans. But I don't think anything like that happens these days, because everything is so corporate and done according to the rules, isn't it?
But I think, looking back on it, it's those kind of stories that make it for all of us. Les Thacker, thank you very much indeed.
Boy, Les Thacker is good value. Fantastic stories that he regaled our Paul Tarsey with there. Another person who has some great stories is a dear friend of mine. I've known him since the 70s when I first started covering IMSA racing, and he goes a little bit further back than I do. As you recall, I talked about earlier, my first being 1988. For Mark Raffauf, his time started when things really were a bit rustic.
For those who have been there in the old days with the old pit lane and everything, of having to purchase toilet paper from the little French ladies that sat in front of the restroom if you needed toilet paper, which led to the standard line here is, if you're going to Le Mans, bring your own toilet paper, okay? That's number one. Number two, don't drink the water. Use bottled water. That was number two. But overall, I've been there, I don't even know, 15, 16 times over various generations of cars, and seen a lot of amazing things, a lot of it good, a lot of it bad. It's a fantastic event. When you talk about events, there's not a whole lot like it, if anything, in the world. And because of that, it just brings back a lot of good memories. But, a lot of people got hurt and killed there. It's pretty dangerous, very dangerous. The old pits were exciting. There were no restrooms at all. You had to pee on the back wall. And if you were there and you're laughing about it, you know what I'm talking about. It was like, how do people do this? I mean, it was pretty Stone Age. And then, things about people cheating on the fuel, they all the fuel came out of one pipe and it was lousy fuel. So our guys they'd wave their hand over here and the pit marshal would be looking at that, and they'd pour a couple quarts of octane booster in the dump bottle so that when they plugged back in the next time, that was the first thing that went in. And we do that 12 times or 13 times. And of course you're using more fuel because the octane booster is a fuel, all that kind of stuff went on. That's how people used to win the race, but they never figured that out until after the fact.
Now, Derek Warwick is probably best known as a Grand Prix driver, but he is a self-confessed Le Mans fan in every way and all about the race, and has contested the race 5 times over the years, culminating in that victory for Peugeot in 1992. He has many stories to tell, so we've decided to run the first half of the interview now, and the follow-up in our second part of the Le Mans Memories from Historic Racing News. Now, I'm delighted to welcome to the Historic Racing News podcast, or re-welcome, in fact, a man who knows a thing or two about Le Mans. He's a 5-time competitor, but he won the whole thing in 1992. It's Derek Warwick. Welcome, Derek.
Good afternoon. Yeah, thank you very much.
It's great to have you on the show, and your evolution in motorsport is well known. I mean, that you started in short oval stock cars at a very young age before moving into the more conventional route of Formula 4. But when you were doing all those stock car bits and stuff, were you interested in the bigger picture of maybe Grand Prix racing or rallying or Indy, or particularly, of course, sports cars and the Le Mans 24 Hours?
I'd love to sit here and say yes, because when you read and see various amazing drivers, they've always been involved in motorsport. They've always followed the history. I didn't. I wasn't even really aware of sports cars in them days. I was aware of Formula One but I didn't really get. I wasn't really involved or even bothered about circuit racing until about 1970 with Joachim Rindt. When he was killed and was possibly made world champion. So I was one of those guys that worked for their father and uncle. I loved Warwick trailers. I loved working in Warwick trailers. I was always focused on what was in front of me. So when I started oval racing with father and uncle, that's all I was bothered about. That's all I ever wanted to do was be European world champion in Superstocks, because that was just my ambition, and Formula Ford, which was the first step to circuit racing, really only came after a fluke fly-on by my Uncle Stan that had a plane at Thruxton that happened to be there on the Saturday or Sunday, he said, "Look, come on, boy, jump on the plane. Let's go to Thruxton. I've just seen something absolutely amazing." And he was watching Jeff Lees in a Royale winning races around Thruxton and Formula Ford. So up until then, nothing really. So I'm ashamed by that, because I'd like to have been one of those famous historians that just love motorsport. But I was a late developer and a late entry into what I call circuit racing.
Yeah, and understandably so. I mean, you had quite a lot on your plate. You were working full time for Warwick Trailers and forging your way in your career. But your first attempt at Le Mans was with that Kramer CK5, which was really a Porsche 936 with the Kramer brothers working on it to create it into a Group C car. It wasn't the fastest car in the field, was it?
Well, it wasn't the fastest by far, and it certainly wasn't the safest. I had no intention, because at that time it was 83, and I was in Formula One with Tolman, and although not earning a lot of money, full of expectations to move up the ladder. And I got a phone call from Kramer asking me to do it, saying that I think Alan Jones was going to, but he pulled out at the last minute. Grand Prix International was the sponsor, and the fee was £25,000. And I remember saying to him, absolutely no way, how much? And he said 25,000. So I left Montreal on the Sunday night or the Monday morning and went straight to Le Mans. I have to say I was quite shocked when I saw the car. It was dangerous. It was space frame. And the first thing I did was going up to Mulsanne. I was doing a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and how quick I could take my foot back off the pedals with my left leg. Then I did it with the right leg, still holding the car flat out at 250 miles an hour, because I knew that if anything went wrong with that car, it would take my legs as a minimum. So, yeah, I mean, but right from that very first run in that car, I absolutely loved it. I love sports car racing. I love Le Mans. I love the circuit. I loved everything about it. The drama, the danger, the speed, the excitement, the expectation. I just love driving at Le Mans.
And I know that by the time you went back there again in 1986, you were driving with TWR Jaguar, and you had some robust discussions with Tom Walkinshaw, didn't you, about the fee for driving?
Yeah, I mean, Tom was not a big payer, and obviously, as a driver, the one thing I was very good at was negotiations. But when you come against a character like Tom, you realise that it's only going to go one way, because Tom was a veteran when it came to motorsport, to the fees, etc., etc. But I desperately wanted to drive for him in '86, simply because I was without a drive. I was supposed to be in teammates with Ayrton. That's all history now. So I was without a drive. So I really wanted to drive for Jaguar and Tom Walkinshaw, because you knew that Tom made winning cars. He knew he was a professional. And you wanted to be a part of that. Now, going to Le Mans was probably one of the most emotional experiences I had up until that time in motorsport, because on the Saturday morning you did a parade in road cars, and me and my teammates sat in the back of this car, and we were paraded in front of the 100,000 British fans or whatever. And I cried. I mean, it was just emotional. There was so much love for Jaguar. I'd like to think it was for me, obviously, but it wasn't. It was for Jaguar. That it really got to you, and it was special to represent Jaguar at Le Mans, for sure. I loved every bit of it.
And obviously, let me just touch on one thing. Were you still sore about losing that Lotus drive because of Ayrton?
Yeah, I was sore, but you know what? When it all happened and I had to change direction, I just got on with it. As you probably know, my book, Never Look Back. So I never looked back. It was done. I couldn't do nothing about it. I had to either sulk for the rest of my life or get on. So I took a drive at Daytona, the Daytona 24 Hours, and again it sort of cemented my love for long distance racing, and from that came Jaguar. And like I say, I'm very proud to be a part of that Jaguar team. Disappointed not to win the World Championship, because we could have and should have, had we not had an engine issue at Fuji at the last race. But as they say, that's motor racing. And it was a difficult year for me because, again, history lesson, Elio De Angelis was killed in the Brabham at Paul Ricard. And Bernie gave me a call. And so I ended up driving the Brabham that year, as well as Jaguar.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast.
Now, Tom Walkinshaw has a lot of great fans, and we can look back on those days at Le Mans, and everybody loved Tom. But I think he was what perhaps we might call a Marmite character, in that you either loved him or you hated him. And I think the motorsport world is pretty evenly split. That Martin Brundle won't have a word said against him, but he was certainly a fairly difficult character to get along with, wasn't he?
I would say he was a very difficult person to get on with. I think because of finances, he and I clashed. I'm very much, maybe I'm a similar character in many ways to Tom. He had a very close relationship with Martin Brundle, but he and I never ever got on. Although I signed for him again in '92 and financially lifted his leg really high and again cemented the fact that we never ever got on. So it was a bit of a love-hate relationship. Later on in life, we crossed bows again at V8 Supercars down in Australia. And fortunately enough, just before, when he started to get ill, really, we ended up having supper together. And what a changed man. And I regret the fact that we bumped heads together during my time driving for him.
But I think he would say one is Tom the businessman and one is Tom the personality, and that they clearly were very different people, I think. And your first Jaguar Le Mans run was in '86, as we've said, and that was with the XJR6. Now, I am a complete novice when it comes to engineering or anything like it, but in '86, the XJR6. 5 years later, you're in the XJR12. To an uneducated idiot like me, they must have been so completely different in terms of cars.
Yeah, they were. I mean, you've got to remember that back in them days, and I hate saying those words, but back in those days, the cars were heavy. You know, you had to be big and strong, and people like John Nielsen, if you remember him, was typical like me, very strong, very tough, and be able to handle it because there was no power steering, no power brakes, obviously a H-pattern gearbox. A big old engine in the back. They were heavy cars, really heavy cars. And then when you got to 91 with the 12, again, a big heavy car, very, very slow, lumbersome gear change. And I used to scream at my teammates every time I got out the car, gearbox, 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 because that really was the weak link to those cars. But you know, they were fine cars, they were winning cars, and you knew that if you signed for Tom, that he would always give you a winning car. And in both '86 and '91, we obviously had winning cars. I think, like I say, we should have won in '86 and also '91.
And obviously, with something like the XJR 14, as he says, those were really almost Formula One cars with bodywork, weren't they? That they had the Ford engine in the back, and that they were rocket ships.
You're talking about a different car now. When you talk about the 14, you know, it's up there with my top 5 race cars I've ever driven because, you know, Ross Brawn had put a lot of love into that car. And he was given a sort of a free rein to come up with something special, and the 14 was special. I mean, it really was a form. It was as close as you can get to a Formula One car with bodywork on, really, because it was a super fast car. And that year was against the Sauber stroke Mercedes with Schumacher, Wendlinger, and Frenzing. So we had some tough opposition, but driving that car was just a pleasure. The only problem with that car is because he wanted the gear shift straight from the gearbox, straight through the V of the engine to the left-hand side of the steering column. So you had to change gear with an H-pattern gearbox on the left side, and of course, you know, when you've gone through Formula Ford, Formula 3, and all of that, to have the gear shift suddenly thrown onto the other side was quite difficult. Because it had so much downforce, and quite often you were caught having to change up or down in the middle exit of a corner. So the downforce put on you was really difficult. That car would have been perfect with a Tiptronic gear change, or at least a sequential gear change, but we didn't have it. No, the 14 was just beautiful. It was one of the prettiest looking cars I've ever seen, and B, definitely one of the fastest.
And yes, I would agree with you about being one of the prettiest. It was certainly that, and it heralded a new age, didn't it? Because obviously those 3.5 litre Group C cars were something completely different again, and which leads us then to your victory with the Peugeot in '92, and to be team leader in a championship for Peugeot which was, let's face it, the sports car to have. How did that come about?
Well, funny enough, halfway through, well, not halfway, maybe 3/4 of the way through '91, Jean Todt, who was the team manager of Peugeot at that time, called me up and said he wanted me to drive for him from '92, and I obviously I was interested. I knew that Tom was not really going to have the same team for '92. And to be honest, Tom and I had such a difficult relationship that maybe I needed something fresh as well. So I flew to France and saw Jean. We instantly fell out over the money, surprisingly enough. But to be fair to Jean, he wanted a flat rate with all his drivers. He didn't want any, or to be seen any preferential treatment one to the other. And I tried to explain to him that I'd come from Formula One, blah, 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 blah. But then he said, well, so did Alio and Delmas and all those guys. So anyway, we did sort of an extra deal, if that's the right way of putting it. And I just liked what I saw. I loved the engine. I loved what he was doing with the new car. And basically, I like Jean. I like the way he was running the team at that time, before I drove the car, that was. And then we ended up doing the deal. So I definitely, I wasn't the leader of the team, but I was definitely the leader of our car with me and Yannick. But I think I became leader of the team simply because I changed a lot of things with the way that the team ran. I put a lot of work into it. I did a lot of miles in the car, more than probably anybody, and well, definitely more than anybody. So I earned the right to direct the direction of development, really.
Yeah, and I think that although you say maybe technically you weren't team leader, the public perception was very much that you were. But let me take you back just a bit, because I'm intrigued that you say Jean Todt got in touch to talk about driving with them in 1992. Does that just happen with a phone call or an email or something, or how does it work?
No, in them days it was a phone call. Jean would call me, or you get somebody to get me to call him, whichever way round it was, and then you had a conversation without mentioning too much about money or anything like that, just an intention, because neither side really wanted to commit over a phone, obviously. It's a matter of looking into each other's eyes and knowing whether you can trust that person, whether he can deliver what he's promising, etc., etc. So we're going back in time now, remember, and I could take you back to the end of '83 when I was still driving for Tolman and had signed for or was trying to sign for Renault in '84. The final deal came through by Telex, and most people that are listening to this won't even know what that is. But, And that's how the deal was done. So yeah, we made the initial contact by phone, and then arranged to meet up in France.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast.
We all know that it takes more than outright speed or even persistent endurance to win at Le Mans. It also takes a fair degree of cunning, and Jim spoke to Kevin Jeannette about a story straight from the horse's mouth, which I'd never heard before, and you really do need to listen carefully just to really get an understanding of this and how it puts everything into a different perspective.
Joining us now on our Le Mans Memory Special is Kevin Jeannette. Kevin is a past winner of Le Mans. Kevin,
Not a winner. Not a winner.
Yeah, you won in '79.
I was at Whittington, but I wasn't there.
Oh, I thought you were there in '79.
No. It was basically the Kramer team and the whole sandwich story, which of course I converted to a baguette, because a baguette is what they have are sandwiches. That was one of my teammates who was just there as we were getting that new car, and he would be a little more educated about it when the car came back to us. So there was only one real Whittington teammate there.
So now see, the truth comes out.
Yeah.
This should be the Truth Be Told podcast. Short version of the baguette story is that it was Don in the car. Bill was in the car, right?
Don.
I had it right the first time. So Don was in the car broke down, couldn't get it fixed, and they sent parts out in a sandwich, for lack of a better terms. And he was able to fix the car and bring it back to the pits.
The whole part of the story and the method that Don did, and Klaus Ludwig, of course, was the king rat in the car, and the Whittingtons, of course, joined in, but Klaus was why that car won. Basically, the Whittingtons, of course, made everything else available, i.e., the purchase of the car, and Don brilliantly fixed the car with some spare parts that were, applied to the car. The whole sandwich story thing is partly or mostly true, i.e., and I did the big thing at Amelia Island when they did the We're Cheaters or whatever that whole story was about. Not us personally, but everybody that was caught out there doing something while racing in the 70s. But the fix was part of the car that was in reserve inside the car, or was it really in the sandwich that went over? And the great news here is some things made it sad afterwards, because of course if the Kramer car and the Whittingtons didn't win, Paul Newman would have. And of course we were friends with Paul Newman, and Paul drove our Porsches. And I look back and I go, well, it wouldn't have been so bad if Paul was able to win with Dick Barber's team. But it's not the way it ended up. And as for how the car was actually fixed, it was done with stuff that was either available in the car or the sandwich thing. The Kramer brothers and the people at Kramer, this is where I said that, the story's mostly true, but I'm not even sure. And who I hear this all from, as I said, I was not there, but the rumor's been going on since that weekend, is that they really didn't know. While he was out fixing the car, everything kind of happened. Remember, there weren't a lot of radios and things like that. And so I can't tell you how much is true. The guy that was there that told the story didn't actually hand over a sandwich to anybody, but somebody did, because Don was hungry and thirsty. But he fixed the car with whatever was used that could have been hidden in the sandwich, which of course is a baguette over there. So it's a great priceless story. The Kramer brothers were badass and still are, and Klaus Ludwig, bless his soul, lost a great race car driver recently, and not to make the story any different, but losing Jochen Moss for all of us was something very sad, and this time of year especially. But anyway,
this is a time of year when we remember our heroes.
Yeah.
Just like anybody who is close to the Indy 500, it's a time when you remember heroes of the past and exalt the heroes of the present.
That story didn't quite pan out the way that I expected it to. But as we said before, everyone has a strange Le Mans story. So let's just finish up. Jim has talked about perhaps some of his memories. Have any of us got a memory left? Yes, I think we probably have. Jim's talked about some of his. Paul, what about your Le Mans memories?
I think, Jim, you never forget your first Le Mans, and I went there in '86 purely because there was a coach that did a pickup in my village. I knew nothing really about motorsport or anything, wasn't involved in it at that time. We just jumped on the coach for a weekend away. And I can remember...
my way, big boy.
Sweet of you to say so. And so we were there really knowing nothing and had the most amazing time. So many things happened. I somehow ended up on a marshal's post out on the old Mouzane watching cars go past at unbelievable speeds. We then decided that we were going to sleep down by the S's down in the chapel, and were under a tree when I was woken by someone trying to steal the bag that I'd strap around my arm, and I got CS gassed as they were trying to get our stuff, and held on tight to the bag, and fortunately some of the Brits around were pouring water over us to try to wash the CS gas off our face, so we went back to the coach and failed miserably to sleep there, and started to go back into the circuit. We were walking through that field of coaches that you have. There's no great gaps between them. You're inching between the gaps, and suddenly we could smell bacon frying. And there was a coach with a whole series of little trestle tables next to it, and you gave the man at one end £1, he gave you a paper plate, and you had sausage, you had bacon, you had a fried egg, you had baked beans, you had a piece of bread and butter, and it was the greatest breakfast I've still ever eaten in my life. There is nothing like an unexpected full English after a rough night. And then sadly we walked back into the circuit to find that we'd lost Joe Gartner in the night with the crash with the 962. So it was sort of the realities of Le Mans suddenly biting home. But it was a fantastic visit. I was thrown on the track by one of the marshals right at the end. All this about crowd invasions, how bad are they? We were physically grabbed and thrown onto the track amongst all the cars still coming around the Ford chicane. I helped push in the ADA Gebhardt that won C2. Went back home. On the Thursday, I bought Autosport magazine because I recognised the picture on the front, and I was writing for them 3 years later.
Wow, that's quite an achievement in itself. I think, as you've both talked about your first time, that I perhaps ought to do the same thing. And we arrived in the Camping des Tribunes, which was... I don't think it's there anymore now, but it was the campsite right next to the Dunlop Bridge. And that was on Thursday night, and it was just getting dark. Cars were on track, and we could see the headlights and hear the noise from the engines. But of course, don't forget, there was no Dunlop chicane in those days. So the cars were flat chat from coming out of the Ford chicane, round past the front of the pits, and right the way through over the top of the hill by the Dunlop Bridge and down to the S's. So there was all of that. We put the tent up, first things first, and when that was done, I heard another car approaching, and I ran to the fence. That was in the days when I could run to the fence, but I ran to the fence as I heard that racing car noise. And what was that car? It was a factory Porsche 936 in Essex Petroleum, red, white and blue livery, driven by Jackie Eakes, rushing past me. And of course, you were very close to the circuit in those days, absolutely flat out. And I was hooked from that moment. And I've never looked back. They were happy days indeed. But that's it for the Le Mans memories from the Historic Racing News, the first part of the show. A special thank you to all of our guests, Mark Raffauf, Kevin Jeannette, Derek Warwick, Les Thacker and Mark Tarsey. There are lots of ways to keep up with historic racing news. Our podcast comes out on the first Wednesday of every month. The 2-hour show includes interviews with drivers and other personalities from years gone by, plus news of historic events like the Goodwood Revival and the Silverstone Festival. And Jim Roller keeps us up to speed on happenings stateside and looks at the activities both on and off the track in the USA.
And you can also follow us on our YouTube channel, HRN Chronicles. It's our version of a time machine. We have archive features, exclusive interviews, and behind-the-scenes stories going way back into the history of our glorious sport. Plus, we keep an eye on the latest classic and competition car auction news. It's a place where motorsport's history lives.
And don't forget our amazing Facebook page. With over 1 million views a month, it is one of the leading social media channels for the historic racing fan. We feature tales from years gone by, news from around the racing world, and we also take the opportunity to flesh out the stories we cover on our podcasts with photographs and yet more background information.
If you would like to find more editions of the Historic Racing News podcast, try searching Historic Racing News wherever you get your podcasts.
The YouTube channel is simply called HRN Chronicles.
And just search Facebook for the Historic Racing News page.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast, a copyrighted presentation of historic racing news in association with White Squirrel Studios. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or usage without the expressed written permission of Historic Racing News is strictly prohibited.
Welcome to part 2 of our Le Mans Memories from Historic Racing News show, where we conclude our conversation with the always entertaining Derek Warwick, who talks to the Baron about his experiences at Le Mans, including that victory in that Peugeot in 1992. We will hear again from Kevin Jeannette about some of his outlandish memories from Le Mans, and more from Mark Raffauf. The circuit and paddock were very different in the 1970s and 80s, and we take a trip down memory lane when we revisit that very rudimentary paddock, which was more like a farmyard than the hub of one of the world's foremost races.
This is the second show in the series, and we hear yet more tales of this fantastic race from both sides of the spectator fences. My name is Paul Tarsey, and I'm joined by Jim Roller, who's been a Le Mans fan since Noah was a boy, and Paul Jurd, who has also been to the event many, many times.
On this second show, we conclude our conversation with Derek Warwick, who talks to the Baron about his experiences at Le Mans, including victory at the wheel of a Peugeot 905 in 1992. We'll hear from Kevin Jeannette about some very outlandish memories from Le Mans, and Mark Raffauf, who steered IMSA through some very exciting times, will share his experiences, too, of spending time at the golf course.
The circuit and paddock were very different in the 1970s and 80s, and we take a trip down memory lane when we revisit that very rudimentary paddock, which was more like a farmyard than the hub of one of the world's foremost races.
While Kevin Jeannette may be most famous for his sandwich or baguette stories that came out of the 1979 Le Mans victory by the Whittington brothers and Klaus Ludwig, Kevin also, in some of his many trips to Le Mans, has enjoyed taking in some of the history of the area. Of course, Le Mans was very significant in World War II, and with just a little bit of searching, you can find a lot of that history. Now, didn't you, one of the places you stayed, didn't you tell me you had a great barn find?
When we were there in 81, we stayed in, the famous chateau. You can identify a chateau however you want. But if you stay in an old one, it's been there for a couple hundred years or more. And we found a way to the attic of this old place. And there were big albums and record books. And there were things going back 300 and 400 years of the history of this thing. And we couldn't read much, but you could see the dates, and it was all AD, meaning after death. but we didn't dig deep enough. So all of a sudden now we're back years later with our own team. The gentleman that owns the Chateau Small, a family home and a farm, finds out that I'm a Volkswagen guy too. And I'm from Southern California, so everybody knows that Volkswagens were a big deal there. So he says, come, I'll bring my son. You can see a special car we have. And his son spoke English because he had a high school education in the UK. So we were talking like old best friends. The rest of the family, of course, were very French and spoke a little English. But so we went into this garage. And in this chateau, in this house, if you walked around, you could see bullet holes in it everywhere. We get into this garage, which has kind of a basement thing in it. It was a split level thing, also built, probably 100 years before anyway. It wasn't as old as the big chateau we stayed in years before, but it was definitely there in World War II. Evidently, this little Type 166 Schwimmwagen, which is the Volkswagen Army vehicle that floats like a boat and drives like a car, was in this garage, and it fell into or flipped over into a lower part of this garage basement thing, and it was just left there. So, of course, when the war ended, the guy is a mechanical guy. He has a mechanical shop. He does castings and machine work just on the outskirts of the perimeter of Le Mans itself. So he's a big Le Mans fan. And when I went in and saw the Schwimmer, it was the way it was left. But because he had a machine shop, a lot of the things that had corroded through a million years of it being there since the 40s, he was repairing, because now all of a sudden these things are worth some dough, and took him a lot of years to put it together. He was redoing part of the transmission and the side casting for the axle, which when it got shot or flipped over, something cracked it. So he just made a new one in his machine shop. It took him a while to do that. But Stuart got pictures because he's still friends with the gentleman who's still living, and got a couple photos of them driving it recently. This little Schwimmwagen. I ended up owning a Schwimmwagen and a Klubelwagen in my Volkswagen collection, which was actually, there was a story done in a French magazine about all the Volkswagens I had. So I guess I should send the article to them and say I had a Schwimmer, which is why I was so excited to see it. I had already owned the Schwimmwagen before that. That's a pretty cool still story for me, especially because of you, Jim, for telling me to put something together in that story. Then Stuart finally got pictures of them driving it, so it's full circle.
You're listening to the Historic Racing News Podcast.
Now here's a voice that's very familiar to many of the English-speaking Le Mans fans, and also Radio Le Mans fans. The man who became famous for his Franglais, Graham Tyler.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Graham Tyler. Graham, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And you were in it up to your neck in the Le Mans pit lane back in the day. But where did it all start for you?
Well, long story short, it all started because I employed a lady in the record shop where I was working at the time. This is back in late 1970s, and her husband was a fanatical endurance racing fan. Now, I'd not really been a motorsport fan of any description, except that I lived around the corner from Thruxton, knew the manager there, and he used to get me tickets. But moving forward to my Le Mans connection, said husband of employee used to work nights, would come in every Wednesday morning with a copy of Motoring News, hot off the press, and would regale me with stories of wonderful places and things that I'd never thought about. Eventually, he persuaded me to go to a 6-hour race at Brands Hatch in 1979, And as soon as I saw the cars and the endurance format, I thought, this is what I've been missing all these years. So 1980, young Tyler rolls up to Le Mans for the first time. And 1980, for those who weren't going with that type of racing back in those days, was the last time that a guy who built his own car then raced it and won. That man was Jean Rondeau, and the M379 was a wonderful goldfish bowl of a car, a huge rounded screen, and it beat everybody, including privateer Porsches, and it was a fabulous race. It rained on and off, sometimes very heavily. My clothing was not appropriate for that. I was absolutely soaked. I was on one of those leave on Friday, back on Sunday night coach trips. The only place you could sleep was in the coach, which I endeavoured to do unsuccessfully for about half an hour. And then I thought, sorry, I'm going to get back to the circuit and see what I've come to pay for, even though it was lashing with rain. It was great. And I was absolutely hooked. And I just then carried on going and going and going, and all sorts of things happened along the way, some of which I will regale you with now. I think it is one of those things that you either get Le Mans or you don't, and if you get it, it most certainly gets you. And I was hooked, and I spent 32 years on the bounce going to Le Mans every year. It became, I'll admit it, something of an obsession, and to the point where back in the early 80s, before I had access to computers and things like that, I used to draw out by hand on a sheet of A4 paper a grid with a countdown from getting home from one Le Mans to leaving for the next. So 350 something squares, all drawn by hand and numbered, and I would tick them off religiously every morning when I got to work. That was that was the level of it, Paul.
And I remember a similar thing, that you would get to 6 months in from June, so you get to around the end of the year, and you'd say, actually, it's now closer to the next one than it is to the last one.
Yes,
and,
indeed.
That's when my countdown would start.
Yeah,
but
you kind of counted years from Le Mans to Le Mans rather than from January to December. And
no, so it was Wild West country then, wasn't it, in 1980?
Oh yes, it was. I mean, it was a very different place then. I'm not going to sort of stray into deciding whether it was better or worse. It was different. Very different. The village inside the circuit was still a little village. There was no corporate hospitality worth speaking of. It was, if you wanted to actually understand what was going on in the race, you had to find yourself close to one of the PA loudspeakers on the half hour, when you would be graced with 2 minutes of Bob Constanduris trying to explain what had happened in the last hour, to the soundtrack of all the cars going by. And you could guarantee that at the precise moment he was going to run down the top 10 for you, you'd get a stream of cars coming past and you heard nothing.
And you'd get a little group of Brits underneath every speaker with their bit of paper and a pen writing down the top 10, and then of course you'd go and buy the newspaper at about 7 o'clock in the morning, wouldn't you?
That's right. Yes, you would. And it was a real art following the race. If you didn't have access to French language. Now, happily for me, I did. So I could usually keep a good eye on what was going on and relay it to the little group of us who travelled with. I think they were called Circuit Travel from Thetford in Norfolk. It was like an upmarket Page and Moy for those who go back that far.
Right.
But it really was an overnight ferry on the Friday, pelt down the road in a coach. To a coach park near the circuit, walk over to the circuit, spend the race there, get back on the coach and go straight home again. So there was no more to be seen than that. When I eventually was able to get myself into a little group of people who were prepared to go camping, then we started staying for longer, and the world opened up all over again. This was also the time, importantly for me, when the 1980 and 81 races were run to the old Group 6, Group 5 regs. But then in 1982, fanfare, along comes Group C. Yes. And my life changed all over again. I will admit freely and openly and without any reservation that I think that Group C was one of the finest formulae in racing ever. It had its problems when it started, and people choose to ignore that or just gloss over it. But the first few seasons of Group C were hard work because it was pretty much a fuel efficiency thing, and they hadn't quite got the numbers right. Or they hadn't got the engineering right, and the fuel efficiency wasn't where it should have been. So the races became a little bit processional, and you hit the right hand pedal at your peril.
Yes, and do you remember that? Do you remember also that in '82 and I think maybe even '83 they ran with the old formula, the Group 6 cars.
Oh yes, they did
as well. So, and they didn't have any fuel limits, did they?
No, and Lancia had those beautiful Group 6 barquettas, as they used to call them, which were astonishing things. Before they built the LC2 to the Group C regs, they were still running those beautiful open top Lancias, fabulous cars, fragile but very, very fast. And Group C spawned a whole new avalanche almost of privateers. Because it was a formula where your imagination was almost as important as your engineering skill, and you could answer the same question: how do I get X thousand miles over 24 hours without running out of fuel? You could answer that any way you wanted, and people did. They came out with all sorts of weird and wonderful ways of doing it, from V8. Jaguars to the glorious Mercedes throbbing away with its turbo V8, and the rotary Mazda, anything in between, and that was what appealed to me. It was the ability to have one formula of racing that allowed so many different technical answers. And it provided some absolutely fantastic racing in its heyday. When it reached the sort of mid to late 80s, up until the end of that formula, were some of the very, very finest races at Le Mans that I remember anyway. And Group C and endurance racing was a real spotlight sport. It was one that drew thousands and thousands of followers from the UK to go to France every year. Numbers were perhaps inflated or perhaps overestimated, but there were huge numbers of English race fans turned up at Le Mans every year, to the point where it became described as an English motor race that actually happens in France. And it was almost that, in the heyday of Jaguar. The numbers of people wearing silk cut livery was just extraordinary.
It was also almost like a football crowd, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, very partisan, which in motorsport is reasonably unusual, apart from perhaps at Formula One level. But yes, it was very partisan. People at the end of the 1988 race, when Jaguar crossed the line first, the scenes were absolutely extraordinary, and they're things that are imprinted on your brain and never go away. Only surpassed for me, moving forward slightly, to when Mazda won in 1991. By that time, I'd progressed from being a humble fence hanger, looking at everything from a distance and longing, to having somehow convinced the then owners of Radio Le Mans, a company called Group 6 Marketing, that it would be a good idea to have some spotters out on the circuit, because we're going back to the day when there was no full circuit coverage by camera, other than when the presenting company chose to be there during daylight hours. There was no overnight coverage or anything like that. So the commentators were dependent entirely on fixed cameras, which very often didn't see what they needed to be seeing. So I came up with this idea, pitched it to the Radio Le Mans people back in those days, particularly Harry Turner and Jim Tanner, and they liked the idea of having 2 or 3 volunteers with walkie-talkies strategically placed around the circuit, so we could follow incidents as they were happening. If person 1 saw a car smoking, person 2 would look out for it and say, well, it hasn't got to me. So we knew it had stopped between point A and point B. That was as sophisticated as it got back then. But that developed trying to spot quick laps during qualifying and so on and so forth, and opened up a lot of viewing points around the circuit, which for an enthusiast were otherwise completely unobtainable, because of course we had press passes.
With all the years that you went, which is your favourite? Just
for the point of it being a Jaguar win, it has to be 1988. 1990 was more lucked in than anything else, because the Brun Porsche broke down at very last knockings. But 1988 was extraordinary because of the crowd participation, because of the euphoria there, because of the memory of going to the bar just outside the main entrance, au Port du Circuit, for a hasty meal the night of the race finishing, and then finding as we returned to the circuit that they'd locked the gates. So our campsite was inside, so we literally had to climb over the gates to get back into the circuit so we could get to the campsite. As I said, the Mazda win was the other one that will always live with me, because by that time I had been granted pit lane privileges, and to see the reaction of the Japanese team and all of their supporters at that victory, the first victory for a Japanese manufacturer, was absolutely extraordinary. The passion, the sheer joy that came out of that crowd of people was something that you never forget.
I know that an awful lot of people will just be loving hearing your voice on the airwaves again, because you meant the beginning of Le Mans for an awful lot of people who will be listening today. But thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Graham Tyler. Come back and talk to us again soon.
Paul, it's been a joy. All you need to do is ask me, and you know I'll be happy to come and natter again.
There are lots of ways to keep up with historic racing news. Our podcast comes out on the first Wednesday of every month. The 2-hour show includes interviews with drivers and other personalities from years gone by, plus news of historic events like the Goodwood Revival and the Silverstone Festival. And Jim Roller keeps us up to speed on happenings stateside and looks at the activities both on and off the track in the USA.
And you can also follow us on our YouTube channel, HRN Chronicles. It's our version of a time machine. We have archive features, exclusive interviews, and behind-the-scenes stories going way back into the history of our glorious sport. Plus, we keep an eye on the latest classic and competition car auction news. It's a place where motorsport's history lives.
And don't forget our amazing Facebook page. With over 1 million views a month, it is one of the leading social media channels for the historic racing fan. We feature tales from years gone by, news from around the racing world, and we also take the opportunity to flesh out the stories we cover on our podcasts with photographs and yet more background information.
If you would like to find more editions of the Historic Racing News podcast, try searching Historic Racing News wherever you get your podcasts.
The YouTube channel is simply called HRN Chronicles.
And just search Facebook for the Historic Racing News page.
Now back to the Historic Racing News podcast and Paul Tarsey.
It doesn't matter whether you're going to Le Mans as a team member, a spectator, a journalist, or even a driver. Everyone has a story about Le Mans. And PJ, Jim and I are no different. So, Paul Jurd, what are you going to start us with?
Exactly as you said there, Paul. I think every garage in the race has enough stories to fill a book over race week. And I was fortunate enough to be here in 2008 with the team running an Aston Martin DBR9. And as a privateer, the factory team would come out the woodwork for Le Mans and steal at least one of our regular drivers. So you always had a different lineup for the 24 hours. And we had a young Dutch driver in the car. Lovely guys were the people who'd come with him. And he got in the car for the first time on Wednesday evening after one of the other drivers had been out. And we were in the very last garage out in the pit lane, the single story ones. And, the pit lane's already sloping uphill. And we got this guy in, strapped him in the car, new tyres on. In fact, a whole new brand new set of wheels on the car. And I was on the headset, so I could hear everything that was going on. And the team manager spoke to him, told him to start the car, to drive away. The rev rose, the clunk of the car going into gear, and then and it stalled. Fair enough, first time in the car. Team manager calmly talked him through the reset and start-up process again, and he stalled it again. And again. And, the pit crew are now by each time sort of looking at each other and making eyes and going, who on earth do we have here faces, when finally he got the car away after several goes. And a minute or two later, then came one of the bravest radio calls I ever heard. As halfway round the lap, he's on the radio. Remember, never driven this car before. Going, I think something's wrong at the back of the car. So box was the instruction from the team manager, and in he comes. Car's back in the garage, up on the air jacks. Off pop the wheels. At which point, one of the crew spotted that the brand new rear wheel we'd put on the right-hand side of the car was missing the drive pegs. It turns out no one had noticed that our new wheel lacked them. So our driver went from what we have, from what do we have here to, with everyone going, hang on a minute. He made a hill start on a race clutch with one rear wheel being driven only in a car he'd never driven before. And it went from, oh my God, to nicely done, mate, and some subtle black slapping of our new recruit. And it's just those little things. I think everyone has that little story. But this guy went from zero to hero in a few minutes.
I think for me, one memory I have is in the early 1980s when I was a regular on the campsites, and a friend of mine who was also a regular asked me a couple of weeks before the race if I'd like to join him and his friends for a barbecue on the campsite on Friday night. It sounded fun, so I accepted. And it was a few days later, he actually phoned me up again and said, we've decided to make it a black tie event, so bring your tuxedo. Which was a bit strange because I packed up the tent, my waterproof jacket, my Wellington boots, my toilet roll, and my tuxedo and my bow tie. And when I arrived for dinner on Friday night, there, right in the middle of the campsite, was a big long table with benches down either side and a white tablecloth. Places were laid with knives and forks, and to cap it all, half a dozen silver candelabra down the middle of the table, complete with candles, of course. Don't ask me how it finished up, because for some strange reason, my memory stopped working after a couple of hours and two or three bottles of cheap wine. But I can't think why I can't remember the end of the dinner. But I do remember a lot of people taking photos and a German TV news station filming us. Jim, I'm sure you have a tale or two.
Oh, I certainly do. And I won't tell the tale of the time you went swimming in your tuxedo. I think that's for a different show. On our first memory show, I talked about my great Le Mans memories from Radio Le Mans. Well, I have some TV tales as well, as you might imagine. The first, of course, was having dinner on driver's left on my first trip at the Auberge Molson. Straight Wednesday night during the first practice. We had just arrived, typical Americans arriving late to the party. And the windows rattled as practice commenced as the cars raced by. This, of course, was pre-chicanes. But my fondest TV memory came from 2003, and it does have a Radio Le Mans element. I had missed the Bentley Boys show on the podium that you'll all recall from 2002 because of a work conflict. But I was back in 2003, and I was producing the show for Speed Channel. Now, during the last quarter hour of the race or so, Bentley's victory was all but assured, and each time the car passed the front straightaway, the English fans rose as one to salute the cars. Now, our pit cameraman noticed this and told us in the truck, and we were on our final commercial break, and I had an idea. I called the Radio Le Mans studio hotline and explained to John Hindhaugh what I wanted to do. He went on the air and briefed the listeners and then put me live on the air, Radio Le Mans, from the TV truck. When we came back from our commercial break, the cars were in the Porsche curves, so I counted the crowd down to taking the pit camera as the Bentleys came out of the Ford chicane, and the crowd rose and cheered as one, and then stayed standing and waved right to our American cameraman. Our executive producer at the time, Rick Miner, exclaimed, "That was the coolest thing he'd ever seen." Only in typical Rick fashion, it had much more salty language than that.
Yes.
So I've basically been lucky enough to be a professional spectator through all my years at Le Mans. One man who wasn't is Mark Raffauf. During his time at IMSA, things like Le Mans were chances and opportunities and requirements to do business deals and help move forward whatever the agenda was for sports car racing. But once the race started, it became an opportunity for him to be a punter just like you and me.
I used to go when my brother, again, crew guy, was running. They had a Grand Marnier crepe stand, and every Sunday morning I'd go up there and get like 20 of them things in a box, use half a bottle of Grand Marnier on it and bring it back to the pits and give it to the crew for breakfast. So for breakfast at Le Mans, in between pit stops, you're having Grand Marnier crepes with confectionery sugar on them. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, it doesn't get much better than that.
Exactly. It was all right. It was a good breakfast. So things like that make it fun, because you could do things there that you just couldn't do anywhere. And then one great memory is Bob Schaefer from Goodyear, who you also know. We used to go out to Mulsanne when it was the 45-degree turn after the 200 bazillion mile an hour straightaway, right? So you could sit on the wall, and there was about 2 feet of grass, and then there was a racetrack. Well, we'd go sit on the wall, and we'd have a beer because it was the golf course out there. It was also the signaling pits. He always wanted to go check out the golf course. So we'd go in the golf club and get a beer, have a beer. We'd sit on the wall, and after 1 or 2 laps, guys like, Holbert and Bell and all our guys, Stuck and Moss, they would drive around and wave to us. So they were going around the corner with one hand, and they were waving to us sitting on the wall during the race. But it was like, oh, I know those guys. Hey, how you doing? It was pretty funny. So we used to do that every year, and everybody would, wave to us. So it was good fun. Can't do that anymore.
No,
moved everything away. They were right there. You could actually smack the mirror with your hand if you wanted to. So it wasn't necessarily dangerous at the speed they were going, but it was pretty funny to watch them drive around this really hard 45-mile-an-hour corner with one hand while they were waving with the other.
The old saw is necessity is the mother of invention. Well, in this case, we have a story about it being the mother of reinvention. In the early 90s, sports car racing was going through some very tumultuous times. Le Mans regulations were also going through some drastic changes as the prototype Group C era had been phased out. The Formula One engine era was being phased out, and GT cars were starting to take center stage at the Great Race. Well, that created a problem for our friends at Porsche. They didn't have a car to race in 1994. So it was left to Norbert Singer to come up with a solution.
What are you planning for Le Mans next year? We said, well, we will improve these LMP 911, what we have the year before, but there will be no big changes. And he said, you think you can beat a McLaren F1? Because McLaren made a road car in 92. Gordon Murray did a Formula car with 2 seats or so. And he said, can you beat that car with your 911 ideas? And I said, actually, not really. But I said, well, but McLaren is going first time to Le Mans. I think they had to learn the hard way. So we might have a chance because they will do mistakes. And Mr. Mark said, I know these McLaren people because he was project leader of the Formula One engine. and he knows Ron Dennis and all these people. And he said, I know these people, they won't make these mistakes. And on the technical side, can we beat that car? I said, no. I said, what ideas you have? And I said, well, we were thinking about it. And I said, no, actually not. And then they said, and this was a real nice sentence, he said, okay, we meet in 1 week, and then you tell me what we can do. Because he hates sitting around a table and everybody is thinking silly things and talking, and this just takes time. And nothing is actually getting out. I said, okay, think about it, come back and tell me. And a week later, we came to Mr. Marhart, and actually nobody has a real idea what we should do. And Max Welti was the head of racing department in these days. He came up to me and said, well, we thought a lot, but we had no idea what to do. Have you an idea? I said, no idea. I don't know. Yeah, but we had to present something to Mr. Marhart. He is disappointed. And I said, well, if we are really on the last edge, there is an idea. There is somebody who tries to make a 962 race car on the road suitable. He was already at Porsche. He was talking to Mr. Marhart. Mr. Marhart said, no, we don't do that, because otherwise we end up with some warranties and these things, and Porsche has the fingers in that project, and we don't like it. And I said, if we help him to homologate that car for the road, then we have also a mid-engine car. It's also a race car. It was a race car. And then we have a chance against McLaren. But I said, be careful. I think Mr. Marhart will not be happy if you mention that. But if this is the only idea, why not? So we went to the meeting, and Mr. Marhart was very friendly and said, well, what do you think? So, and at the end we said, well, there is a really silly idea. And we talked about this story. And Mr. Marhart actually doesn't say anything, was silent. Then he stood up and said, okay, I will ask my colleagues about this idea, and went out of the room. No detonation or whatever. And we went home. I think two days later, he called us and he said, do it. Okay, we called Mr. Dauer, who was trying this. He was in Nürnberg. He was, of course, very happy and said, now Porsche is doing this and this. And they said, no, be careful. We just do the road homologation. What you do with your road cars and when you sell, it's your problem. We just want the basic road car, nothing else. We started developing, and now lots of things have, of course, changed. Because the 962 in the old days had 880 kilos. The GT car had to weigh 1,000 kilos. The tire was much smaller. We raced on 16-inch. Now we had 14-inch. The big aerodynamics, the ground effects were gone because we had to have a flat bottom. This was done, I think, at the beginning of 94. So we have just 4 months to make the road homologation, to develop the race car out of this road car. And there was some funny shapes on the road car, what he did, because he said, well, I would like to have the road car looking like this. And we had to stick with that because it was on the road car. At least we got the road homologation. It was a noise, and it was something else what we had to do. The emission, of course, had to be done. And this was done, and at least we had the paper, and we invited Mr. Alan Berthaud from ACO to look at the car and to get a pre-examination. We didn't want to go there and say, look, this is and have the discussion in the paddock. We want to show him what we have done. And I remember there was a meeting with him in Weissach. It was one of the toughest meetings I ever had, because when he saw the car, he said, no, you will not race. I said, look, in your regulation, we have a road homologation. A low volume approval, but it was a road homologation, like what is in the regulation. And at the end, he came up and said, well, a road car must have a bumper, and this car has no bumper, so it's illegal. The guy from the road homologation in Porsche, he had prepared a little paper, and we got a letter from the chairman of traffic, I don't know the name. It was written that in Germany a bumper is not necessary. So Alain Berthaud said, okay, it's legal, against the spirit of GT racing, so you can race. But I promise you, the year after, it will not be racing anymore. That's it. I said, okay, that's fine. So at least we came to Le Mans and we raced there. And surprisingly, McLaren was not coming. We were racing actually some other cars. And of course there were prototypes there, Toyota prototypes. And we were aiming for the GT class because it was clear. Prototypes are faster because they are lighter, have more power, have more tire. So, and the prototypes, we were in practice pretty fast. I think we were already around 5th or 6th fastest on the grid, which was surprisingly. In the race, well, most of their prototypes couldn't go to the speed what they had in qualifying, and we had, I think, 2 or 3 prototypes ahead of us, and they ran in trouble, more or less, and I think 4 hours before the end of the race, the last prototype had the problem, and we were leading the race, and at the end we won the race. So it was a big entrance in GT racing, and we didn't have a bumper. And it was clear this car will never come back to Le Mans.
In our first show, we looked at how basic the campsite facilities were back in the late 70s. And if you think it's basic now, it really was rough back then. But it wasn't just the campsites. Paul reminisces with his brother Mark Tarsey about their stories from those days, nearly half a century ago.
I'm talking to Mark Tarsey about our memories for our first and early trips to Le Mans. And in part 1, we touched on the sanitation and the lack of it in the campsite. I mean, these days, I think it's pretty basic, but in those days it was incredibly basic.
Oh, I think if it had been upgraded, it might have made basic if we were lucky. When sun came up on our first day, and don't forget at Le Mans in the middle of June, that's about 4 a.m. So when the sun started to come up and we started to awaken, we thought, well, a quick recce down to see where we were, because we had no idea. We'd arrived in the dark. We had no idea the proximity to dare I say it, a shower. That hope was soon to be dashed, and of course the loos and washing facilities. So we did find within about 100 yards away was the block containing all of the above, and round the outside of it were the gentlemen's were the urinals stuck on the outside wall. And the first thing that struck me was that people would walk down, mainly Brits, would walk down to this block with a sponge bag and a towel underneath their arm, expecting this to be like Butlins, in the 50s. Their hopes were soon dashed because the first thing they would have realised was that all of our French hosts would be doing the same, but instead of going and positioning themselves in front of one of the urinals, they would forsake all that and just do it straight in the bushes alongside it. I never really understood that. If the facility's there, why not use it? But that didn't seem to matter to them. So anyway, we did at least find somewhere where we could do that. But anything more than that, anything with a number 2 involved, that was a rather different kettle of fish. And we soon realised that if you were going to do that, do it now, because in a day's time, this is Friday morning, but by Saturday or Sunday, these would not be the places you wanted to be.
And obviously, one of the other things about the differences is the funfair. Funfair was down on what we would now call driver's right on the way into the S's, much, much bigger than it is now. And if I were to say it was an adult-themed funfair, would that be fair?
Well, yes, not only an adult-themed funfair, but also a ghoulish-themed funfair, I think would be reasonable, because yes, of course there were strippers and what have you, but we were more amazed by some of the things to see, which were always behind some sort of screen or cloth or whatever that meant you got a little glimpse, and then you paid your 10 francs or whatever it was, and you went in and got a view of the whole thing. And the whole thing was either some woman naked woman covered in snakes, or the fattest woman in the world, or whatever it was, and wrestling as well, where there was somebody in the crowd who knew how to come and wrestle one of the individuals, and it was just the amazing thing of, you would never see this. You might have seen it in a fair in Britain in the 1870s, probably, something like that, But this was all real life stuff. And they also had the Wall of Death, where they'd ride these little Fiat 500 and a motorbike around these vertical walls. All stuff now that just would never appear, even in France with health and safety. But what an experience, and I'm so pleased we did it.
And looking back now, the whole of the paddock, I mean, there was a bit of the paddock behind the old pits, which was normally for the Gloire de France kind of teams. It had been Rondeau, and it was all sorts of other people. But the rest of the paddock was just the Wild West.
Oh, Wild West wasn't in it. I mean, if you looked at the pits in those days, the pit was just an open area where the car would be worked on. But the piece behind it, instead of being, spotlessly clean and spacious and room for the car to be backed into, none of that at all. It was extraordinary to think that there was it was a few square yards probably behind each pit. And mainly enough for the crew to hang around in, and behind that was a little gravel corridor. And I remember our friend Nick Adams saying that his abiding memory of that was the incredibly strong smell of stale urine in that gravel area, because nobody could be bothered to actually go and find the loo, which was probably 25 yards away. They just go there. Anyway, the fact that there was no paddock, or anything like it in the pit area meant that, behind that area was what we now understand as a paddock. But that was about as much regulated, seemingly, as the campsite was. So you just find these people or teams would find themselves a little space and park up and put their transporter there, and there'd be a little sort of gazebo affair where they'd have their tools laid out and what have you. And you could tell that some of them had slipped them a few quid probably and got a slightly better space than others, but it was primitive. But the great thing about it was, on the Friday, obviously a non-practice day, non-track day, you could get right up close to all these teams as you walked through the paddock, and quite often have good chats with them as well, and they were more than happy to do so. I just remember some of them would happily take you in, especially kids. They would take small kids in and show them the cars and maybe I can't believe I'm saying this now. I remember the early Rothmans Porsche. It was a 956, I guess, that they put on the ground next to their paddock area a front and a back section of bodywork. And of course we couldn't resist it, so we went and sat down as if we were in the driver's seat between front and back bodywork. I mean, I hesitate to think what would happen to you if you tried to do that today. But it was a very different thing. It was I say spectator friendly. I don't think it was particularly friendly in that respect, but it was just the way it was.
Okay, we were younger. We were probably more naive. We hadn't had the joys of decent hotels and things. But do you think we had the best of times?
Certainly. It's always rose-tinted specs, isn't it? All that stuff. But it's that Neil Sedaka song. I miss the hungry years, and I began to become less enchanted with the whole experience, probably during the 90s, early 2000s, because when it became much more FIA-like and much more regulated and and for reasons that I understand very well, it became less of an adventure, I think you could say. And we used to treat that as a holiday. And the holiday wasn't just about going to Le Mans. You know, on the Friday, we'd get in the car and we'd drive down to some local village or small town and have a bit of lunch somewhere. And, you know, it was much more of a trip, really, rather than get there, do the race, get back.
Happy days indeed, and you've reminded me of several of those crazy times, and the fact that it's very nearly half a century ago. I'm just going to file away and think nothing more about it. But Mark Tarsey, thank you very much indeed for sharing all that.
In the first part of our Le Mans memories from Historic Racing News, the Baron had a chat with Derek Warwick, who talked about his experiences with Tom Walkinshaw and the Silk Cut Jaguar team and gave us some fascinating insights into his relationship with Tom. But of course, he was far from finished with Le Mans, and he returned the following year as team leader of the Peugeot squad.
So let's look at Le Mans 1992, your victory year. You had, with your teammates, probably the dream team, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, Yannick was bloody quick. He was also very weak sometimes. He was somebody that could also go very slow. So as a team leader, you could almost juggle him to do what you wanted him to do. And he was either a good backup driver, and occasionally you'd actually put him out to bat for you in qualifying, because you try and keep it even because you didn't want it all to go one way. Yannick was a super guy. He was okay for me to direct the team, really. And then, of course, Jean gave me full responsibility of bringing in the third driver for Le Mans. And, of course, I jumped straight and called Mark Blundell up, which he still owes me a percentage, by the way. I have told him a few times, and he has no idea what I'm talking about. A good, solid, strong, fast driver, and also a gentle driver when he needed to be, which is what you needed for Le Mans.
Talking of dream teams and everything that goes with that, you made a final appearance at Le Mans in 1996 in the Courage, in Yves Courage's car with maybe a couple of superstars.
When they called me and asked me if I'd like to drive the car, I looked at the car. I didn't think it was quick enough to win Le Mans. I wanted to go back. I pretty had nothing to do in them days. So to get back into a sports car, go back to Le Mans, and be teammates with Jan Lammers, who I knew so well. One of the loveliest guys you will ever meet. Really genuine, super fast, and ticked all the boxes you needed as a teammate. And of course, the legend of our sport, Mario Andretti. Mario was someone that you knew about but didn't know. So it was a pleasure to be able to share a car with him. But several things came for that, really. One is you realize how a legend is born. First of all, he has to be the most selfish son of a bitch you will ever meet, but at the same time have this amazing charisma that was so addictive that you just want to be in his company. So I've met a few people very similar to that since then, and maybe even before then. Driving with Mario was special. You know, he's a legend of our sport. He's driven everything. He's won in everything. Unfortunately, we didn't give him the victory he so much wanted at Le Mans. And he made it very plain. He wanted to qualify the car, he wanted to start the car, and he wanted to finish the car. He didn't want to do any of that hard work in between unless he had to. And if it rained, he definitely didn't want to get in the car. Because if you remember rightly, it was an open-top car. He was a super guy. I'm not going to say nothing negative about him. I caught up with him actually at Miami just this year. So yeah, he was a formidable teammate. He wasn't super quick in the ultimate lap because he was obviously getting on in the years a little bit. But you know, when you set down to your race pace and decided what that pace was going to be, he was there. I mean, he was there. I've often said that about John Fitzpatrick when I drove with him with the J. David car at Brands in '83. Okay, he wasn't ultimately the super quick, but when you got into a race, you know, you had to keep on your toes, otherwise he was going to take over the number one spot.
And you did the race obviously a number of times. Winning is always going to be the best, but what else do you look back on as being your favourite race out of all those?
You mean which car, which year?
Which year?
Well, that's not too difficult, really. I mean, in terms of emotion, was '86 Jaguar. As I said, it was very emotional and a very proud moment to drive for Jaguar. '91 was disappointing in terms of Le Mans because we couldn't race the XDR 14. So for me, it was a bit of a bore. '92, you know, I mean, actually winning Le Mans, and also, and I've said this many times, I mean, Jean had so much respect for me because I worked so hard in that team to win the World Championship in Le Mans, that when, you know, and I was very aware when I signed for Peugeot in '92, that we had a car full of frogs in the other car. So I presume I can still say that, can I?
I think you can, yeah. Well, you have.
I have now, yeah. So I was very aware that there could be some favoritisms. But when Jean turfed out Yannick to do the last stint in the car, i.e. bring it home for the victory, and put me in the car, because he knew how much it meant to me to win Le Mans and pin something on my little brother's life, if you like. And that's what he did. You know, he took Yannick out. So there you are, a French team, French driver winning the biggest French race in the world. And he didn't care. He put the pom in there, and I brought it home. So yeah, '92 was special. They're all special, to be honest, because it's a privilege to race at Le Mans. You know, it's one of the fastest circuits you will ever race on in terms of top end speed, and it's a craft you learn. When you're racing at Le Mans, you're obviously generally running with a different aerodynamic package. We used to call it back in the early days the long tail. And by running a long tail, you've got better fuel efficiency, and was trying to just get that extra half a lap or lap out of the car. But also the car became very nervous. It kind of floated on the Mulsanne, and you drove the car almost between two fingers on each hand, not two hands, because
wow,
because it was just very, very floaty. I remember the first time I drove the Jaguar in '86. I mean, it was floating all over the circuit, and we had to put a little bit more downforce on just to allow us to be able to change direction, because not sometimes, you know, a lot of the passing you did with the slower cars was on the Mulsanne. So yeah, no, it was special. I love the fact that you had teammates, because it's quite the opposite to Formula One, where everything is so aggressive. Everything is mind games about getting the upper hand of your teammate, whereas all of a sudden you want your teammate to be fast. So yeah, it was a different discipline, and a discipline I absolutely loved.
Derek Warwick, thank you very much indeed for talking to Historic Racing News. Come back and talk to us again soon.
It's always a pleasure, and thank you very much.
Well, that's it for this Le Mans Memories from Historic Racing News. A special thank you to all our guests, Mark Raffauf, Kevin Jeannette, Derek Warwick, Les Thacker, Graham Tyler and Mark Tarsey. We hope you've enjoyed this slightly unusual podcast. If you have, then that is great, and please share the fun, share the pod and tell anyone you think will like it all about us. I've been lucky enough to meet some of you lately and had a great chat, so a hi to Mark, Martin Gurney and Matt Haskell. And again, I'm sure you join them in wishing Paul and Jim all the best. Don't forget to take a look at our YouTube channel, HRN Chronicles, and why not join the million other historic race fans who are part of the Historic Racing News Facebook page. We hope to catch up with you again very soon, but for once, my name is Paul Jurd, and as always, if you have been, thank you very much for listening.